we should be writing.
Many of us have at some point in our lives experienced serious symptoms of anxiety and depression. This has been especially heightened under the COVID-19 pandemic conditions. In this podcast, we are going to be shedding some light on mental health and how we as the student community of Wits can recognize worrying symptoms and the best way to cope with them. Hi, I am Akhona Matshoba and I am your host this week on the Mental Health in Isolation episode of the We Should Be Writing podcast, a podcast created by the Wits journalism class of 2020. Before we start, sensitive listeners should be aware that topics of anxiety and depression will be discussed throughout this episode. So earlier this week, we put out 2 poll questions on our social media to get an idea on how Wits students have been coping with remote learning. Firstly, we asked students if they found remote learning more stressful than attending lectures, and more than 2/3 of the people that voted said yes, with one student responding that she found it hard to monitor her pace because she felt her work kept piling up. Secondly, we asked students if they enjoyed online learning or not, and every 3 out of 5 students that voted said they would never do it again. However, one voter commented that she is enjoying our new normal as it allows her to work in her own time and spend more time with her daughter. Our editor, Niall Higgins, spoke to Akhona Matshoba, a 21-year-old Wits University student who is currently completing her honours in English literature, to understand just from a student's perspective how she has coped with remote learning and the COVID-19 pandemic in general.
We are joined by Akhona Matshoba. She also used to be a permanent counsellor at the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, also known as SADC, which is a free mental health telephonic helpline. Have you experienced any anxiety or stress yourself due to online learning? And if so, in what ways has it affected you?
Oh, definitely. There's been a lot of stress and anxiety with online learning. I think just generally because of lack of direction that you get from it. I mean, in a postgrad setting already, you are kind of doing things on your own will. You have to do the majority of the work. We had very little lectures and meetings, but there still felt like some sort of structure and something to go towards. When it transitioned to online learning, some lecturers would do lectures, some of them would just send out notes, and it became a sort of place where you didn't really know where you were at with it. It felt very lost and sort of disorientating. And so it causes a lot of anxiety and stress because you are suddenly now falling behind with your work. You have deadlines coming up. We also had to do take-home exams, which were, extremely difficult. We had a lot of pressure. We had to do 2 essays within 3 days. It was definitely and has still been quite a stressful time and, definitely difficult.
How do you think the lockdown has affected students' emotional and mental health during this time?
I definitely think it's been a struggle for students. I think already students are under a lot of pressure. A lot of them, including myself, have maybe other commitments like part-time jobs that they may have lost. So there's a financial stress there, or maybe now they have to work, but also still work at home. And now the workload is even more now that you don't have lectures and you're sort of being left to do it yourself. So I think it's definitely been a tough time for most students. During it, we have to sort of adapt to it very quickly. And at the same time, we may have, like I said, other struggles. Some students also didn't have access to online. They don't have an internet access. They may not have technology in order to do that. So that's an even bigger stress because now they're worried, are they even going to be able to pass their course or degree?
Would you say there has been any positive aspects of remote learning? And if so, what?
I think because of being online, not being in class, our lectures have been sort of more lenient with how the sort of deadlines they give us and what they expect from us during this time, and also sort of accommodating to people who are struggling. Like, let's say, you can't make a lecture because of load shedding. They've been recording it and sending it out. And also we've had WhatsApp groups, you're able to contact the lecturer directly. So I think the only positive through this has just been a little bit more space to breathe. But I think overall it has been quite a challenging time. I wouldn't say it's something I would want to revisit.
Do you believe there are ways that online learning and teaching could have been improved during the lockdown? And if so, what do you think could have been done to make it better or easier?
Initially, the lockdown, people had to leave their reses and go home. And already that was such a troubling and stressful time. Then to not have internet access, or maybe I know that Wits was at the beginning supplying some sort of data to students, but some students live in areas that don't have even cell phone connections or that kind of network. So I think what could have been improved is sort of helping those who really didn't have access to all the things that maybe I do or other students do, which is, a Wi-Fi connection, a laptop, things like that. And I think that could have been handled a bit better in terms of even discussing it with those students. Because, emails were sent out, but you have to remember, if a student doesn't have access to internet, they're not even seeing those emails. So I think that could have definitely been handled better. And then in just terms of online learning, if there was better communication, that it would have been handled a little bit better.
And the final question I have is, what advice would you give to students who may be battling with mental health issues as well as the stresses of online learning?
Well, first, I just want to say that, this is a stressful time. So don't feel like maybe you're overreacting or that you are maybe coping worse than someone else. Because, this situation is completely ridiculous, actually. And so however you're taking it, however you're feeling it, it's so important that you know that those feelings are valid and they are, something that obviously we want to cope with and something we want to deal with, but you shouldn't feel like, maybe you're taking it worse than others. So what is important is that you find coping mechanisms that work for you. So whether it be giving yourself time out of a day to go outside and just de-stressing for like 5 minutes a day, or whether it be speaking to a therapist over Zoom. There's so many different ways that you can find, but it's definitely a trial and error. I don't think the thing that might have worked for you to stop your anxiety beforehand might not work now, because this is an added pressure. This is an added issue. So I think just trial and error. If you need to reach out to people, speak. Obviously in this time, we're feeling all a bit more isolated and alone. So it's so important that you speak to your friends, speak to your family, reach out to people who usually help you with that anxiety and stress. And if you are someone who knows someone else that's struggling, reach out to them as well. Be proactive with it. It's so important that we just stay connected during these times, even if it's sort of over the phone, but also that we're giving ourselves the time to breathe. And I know that can be sort of a hard thing to do during this time, but as long as you're making small steps towards it, you're going to find that you're going to be able to cope just a little bit better. And I think that's the most important thing to take away from it. It's just finding things that work for you for right now.
After reading through all your responses, I think it's time we spoke to a professional and hopefully give you the answers you have been waiting for. Today, we will be joined by Matome Mashatola, a psychologist at the Wits Counselling Careers and Development Unit, who will break down anxiety and depression for us and also offer advice on how you can best cope with these during this unprecedented time. So the first question that we would like to ask is basically, how can students who are working, or how can isolation rather influence how a student's coping with mental health? How does it affect their mental well-being?
If we look at what has happened, what do we do with that? I think for me is the most important. What we do where we find ourselves with the situations of our life, that becomes very important. So it can be, for lack of a better word, we call anxiety, we call it depression, and there's very normal feelings of paranoia, of just feeling uncomfortable, feeling overwhelmed with the online working, feeling overwhelmed with also having to manage family positions, play a role in the family, feeling overwhelmed, not having access to resources that are actually helpful. Unlike when you're on campus, you have library, you have other classmates. And so that in itself brings a lot of uncomfortableness. And I think it's a very difficult time for everyone. And how do we then start having a conversation that is around support?
what symptoms can students look out for to kind of indicate to them, okay, now you are walking into a dangerous path, or maybe an unhealthy mental state of anxiety? Or what can they look out for to indicate to them, okay, maybe I'm having a depressive episode?
I think we need to treat mental health issues as if they're rather they are just normal part of human being experience. I think in that journey, then I think it's very important then to start noticing when things are within my space I can't take control of. For example, the simplest thing of waking up and doing your bed, being able to participate at home, whatever role it is that you have, being able to still be connected to friends and loved ones. But when one starts realizing that actually there's certain things that have been meaningful in my life, and those things don't seem to no longer, I'm not longer able to perform, if I can use it this way, to perform these things that I was actually okay performing. I think that's a time to be worried. When you are normal life, your everyday life, to participate, to be productive, to be a member of a community, a member of a society, a member of a family, start diminishing into kind of, a lot of us will start to be very isolated from everyone we care about, It creates this vicious cycle that is just going down and down into what we may then later on call it like a very much a diagnosed depression. No sense of support, no sense of worth, no sense of some people having a sense of hopelessness. I think being able to be aware of that and acknowledge it, you can't accept something that you're not aware of.
What then can students do to help themselves out of the situation? Who do they reach out to? What do they do?
I think being able to take a hit than reject it, I think it's a very good beginning. We are going to take hits in our life, and I think just this period, it's a big hit. It's like if we're looking at boxers, it's like Muhammad Ali's face right in your face, which he knocked out quite a lot of people. Being able to receive a hit and really not reject it. We tend to deny experience that is actually there. We tend to want to be strong, this hard, solid strength. And the problem with that one is that it actually breaks when there's enough pressure on it. So then, as you're saying, then the next thing will be what is around me that I can use? What do I have access to? I might have access to a sister, at home. I might have access to a neighbor. I might have access to a friend. I can have a conversation. I can share my experiences with these people that care about me, and they can provide a sense of support for me.
How do we speak to our friends who are going through a lot at this point? How do we communicate to them to let them know that, okay, I am here for you. I may not be there physically, but I am here for you when you need me. What tools do we equip ourselves with?
I think what we tend to want to do is we get so overwhelmed either by not being able to change the situation or for someone that we really care about. Acknowledge that the best we can do a lot of time is to listen and even cry with them, because it will be really painful. And I think that's the best we can do in a lot of situations. If it becomes tough, then we rather than refer appropriately. We say, okay, this is what I know. I encourage you to talk to someone. I encourage you to seek assistance.
What is your perception of blended learning? Do you think there is a future for blended learning? Is it proving to be conducive for students that you've interacted with, or is it out of the question?
We have a huge digital gap. We know that a large percentage of our students are coming from very disadvantaged community. But I think to do that, we have so much work to do to prepare our communities. After the corona incident, I don't think it will be very easy for anyone to stop with all the things that they have implemented. But I think more work needs to be done in our communities where these children, where these kids are.
Well, there you have it. Psychologist Matome Mashatola reminding us that it is okay to feel out of place during this time. Also highlighting that it is important for people who are experiencing destructive symptoms of depression and anxiety to speak to someone they trust or seek professional help. To seek professional help, students can call the South African Depression and Anxiety Group crisis line at 0800 567 567 or call the Wits Student Crisis Line at 0800 111 331. Students can also email the Wits CCDU at info.ccdu@wits.ac.za or call 0861 322 322. Because face-to-face counselling is still suspended due to the COVID-19 pandemic at the CCDU office, students can now download the Wits Student Crisis Counselling app, which provides counselling online or via text 24/7, 365. The link to the app is available on the CCDU website. You have been listening to the Mental Health and Isolation episode of the We Should Be Writing podcast, hosted by Akhona Matshoba, edited by Niall Higgins, and produced by Laura Ann Hunter and Khuleko Siwele.